In the 2nd century BCE, along the rugged southern shores of the Black Sea, lay the small but wealthy kingdom of Pontus. Its fertile lands, rich mineral resources, and strategic coastal position made it a crossroads of east and west. From this distant corner of the Hellenistic world would rise one of Rome's greatest enemies, a man whose hatred would burn across continents and decades. His name was Mithridates VI Eupator, known to history as the Poison King. Mithridates was born into a royal family defined by both power and peril. His father, King Mithridates VI, was assassinated, poisoned during a royal banquet when the boy was still a child. The murder left a lasting scar and a lesson that would shape his destiny. In a world of ambition and treachery, poison was the most dangerous weapon of all. Power passed to his mother, Leonidas II, who ruled as regent. But danger lurked everywhere. Fearing for his life amid palace intrigue, the young prince vanished into the wilderness. According to ancient accounts, he spent years in exile, surviving in the harsh Anatolian mountains. He hunted, rode, and hardened himself against the elements. These years forged in him not only physical strength, but a steely patience and relentless will, qualities that would define his later rule. When Mithridates finally returned to Pontus, it would be not as a boy, but as a man ready to reclaim his birthright. Mithridates seized power with ruthless resolve. Rivals were purged, political enemies crushed, and alliances forged. Under his leadership, Pontus transformed from a vulnerable kingdom into an ambitious regional power. But his ambitions stretched far beyond the Black Sea. He was a student of strategy, science, and languages, and most famously, of poison. Determined never to share his father's fate, he began experimenting with toxins, testing them on condemned prisoners and consuming small doses himself to build immunity. This practice, later called Mithridatism, turned the very weapon that once terrified him into his greatest defense. Soon, no poison could harm him. Enemies might plot in the shadows, but their attempts would fail. The boy who once feared poison had now mastered it, and the world would come to fear him for it. This mastery became a symbol of his reign: power through knowledge and survival through preparation. Mithridates was ready to challenge the greatest empire on earth. Mithridates' obsession with toxins was more than paranoia. It was a metaphor for his politics. Just as he had made himself immune to poison, he believed he could make his kingdom immune to Rome's growing influence. He fortified Pontus militarily, reformed its administration, and built alliances with discontented Greek cities, tired of Roman greed. Every step was part of a larger plan, not just to defend Pontus, but to avenge every humiliation Rome had inflicted upon the East. By now, Rome's shadow stretched deep into Asia Minor. Corrupt governors extorted wealth. Tax collectors stripped cities bare. Roman creditors humiliated noble families, seizing property and enslaving debtors. Across the Hellenistic world, resentment smoldered. Mithridates saw himself not just as a king, but as a liberator, a champion of Greek freedom against Roman tyranny. And in that resentment, he found the perfect fuel for revenge. The stage was set for one of the bloodiest uprisings in antiquity. In 88 BCE, Mithridates made his move. Across dozens of Greek cities, messengers carried a single chilling order. On a chosen day, at the same hour, every Roman and Italian would die. It was a plan as audacious as it was brutal. Vengeance not against an army, but against an entire occupying class. The day would become infamous in Roman memory, a nightmare they would never forget. Mithridates was no longer just a king. He was now an avenger. The slaughter was swift and merciless. Roman citizens were dragged from their homes and butchered. Families were torn apart, women and children massacred in the streets. Slaves who betrayed their masters were rewarded with freedom. Debtors saw their obligations wiped away. When the blood stopped flowing, as many as 80,000 Romans and Italians were dead. The massacre, one remembered as the Asiatic Vespers, was more than revenge. It was a declaration. Rome's power was not absolute. Rome's response was immediate and furious. The Senate dispatched Lucius Cornelius Sulla, one of its most formidable generals. Mithridates' armies clashed with Rome and Greece, but Sulla's disciplined legions crushed them at Chaeronea and Orchomenus. Even Athens, inspired a rebellion by Mithridates' call, was besieged and starved into submission. By 85 BCE, both sides were exhausted. A peace was signed. Mithridates paid tribute and surrendered territory. Yet he remained king, and his hatred of Rome burned hotter than ever. The uneasy peace was nothing more than a pause. Mithridates spent the following years rebuilding his armies and strengthening his alliances. He reached out to discontented rulers, prepared new strategies, and sharpened his hatred into purpose. This time, he would not simply resist Rome. He would seek its destruction. And in 73 BCE, war returned. The Second Mithridatic War erupted into the Third, a conflict that would decide the fate of the East. The brilliant Roman general Lucullus was sent to crush him. At Cyzicus and Cabira, Pontic forces were routed, forcing Mithridates to flee across the mountains into Armenia, where his son-in-law Tigranes the Great offered refuge. Yet Rome's wrath followed him even there. Lucullus invaded Armenia and captured the capital, Tigranocherta, in a stunning victory. Still, Mithridates refused to yield. He regrouped in the mountains and waged a relentless guerrilla campaign, harassing Roman supply lines and dragging the war on. The conflict dragged into its second decade. Though beaten repeatedly, Mithridates proved impossible to eradicate. Rome began to tire of the cost until it turned to its greatest general, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great. Pompey was relentless. He reorganized Roman forces, forged new alliances, and prepared to deliver the decisive blow that would finally end the Poison King's defiance. But the dream was fading. His armies were gone. His allies had deserted him. Even his own people had grown weary of war. In 63 BCE, the ultimate betrayal came. His son, Pharnaces II, turned against him, seizing power and rallying what remained of the Pontic forces. Mithridates' once mighty empire collapsed, leaving him a fugitive king with nothing left but his hatred. Alone and aging, Mithridates withdrew to Panticapaeum in Crimea. There, in a cold and distant palace overlooking the Black Sea, he reflected on a life spent at war with the world's greatest power. Even now, he could not bring himself to surrender. If Rome would not bow to him in life, then it would not parade him in chains and death. He prepared one last act of defiance: suicide by poison. It was a fitting end for the man who had mastered toxins, who had once made death itself his ally. Yet fate had one final twist to offer. After decades of self-immunization, the poison failed to kill him. The weapon that had defined his life betrayed him in death. With the end approaching, Mithridates turned to his most trusted companion, a loyal Gallic bodyguard named Bituitus. Calm and composed, he issued his final command: to end his life with a sword. The blade struck true. The man who had defied Rome for nearly 50 years, who had slaughtered its citizens, humbled its legions, and terrified its senate, was gone. Yet even in death, his legacy endured. Mithridates had not destroyed Rome, but neither had Rome truly conquered him. For decades, it had thrown its greatest armies and finest generals against him. And still he resisted. To his enemies, he was a monster. To his people, a hero. But to history, Mithridates VI Eupator, the Poison King, remains the embodiment of vengeance, a man whose hatred shook empires and whose legend still whispers across the centuries.